Hello, how's it going, everybody? I'm here, and so is Dax, and she just won't get out of the way. But I am here today. Today to talk about Final Fantasy II. I'm really excited about this because this is the first time I've ever played Final Fantasy II. So my Final Fantasy memories of this section will be a little more recent. I can't really go back to those wonderful childhood halcyon days. It's all kind of in the past 2 weeks. So less memories and really more of a straight up review. As I said in my last Final Fantasy memories video for the first game, I've always been kind of afraid of Final Fantasy II because it's just so radically different from other Final Fantasy games, both its predecessor and the ones that followed. And for a little bit of a history backstory lesson for this, as far as I'm able to deduce, a lot of this stems from a man named Kawazu Akitoshi, who was actually involved in the design of the first Final Fantasy game as well. In fact, I've read that he was the one who had the idea to let players choose their characters' classes at the beginning of the game. But this was the last Final Fantasy game that he worked on, and from what I understand, he was the one who instituted the interesting leveling system that was in this game, and it stands to reason that it's true, because he would go on after this to create the Saga series. This wasn't the last Final Fantasy game he ever. It was the last main Final Fantasy title he ever worked on. He'd come back to the series for Crystal Chronicles, but he would go on to create the Saga series after this, many of which utilized a very similar level progression system as this game. Final Fantasy II was almost going to be released in America. Square had released promotional materials for it. They had a preliminary translation, but they ended up passing over it in favor of Final Fantasy IV because this was 1991 and Super Nintendo had already come out and they would prefer to do a more recent game. But it's funny, in terms of the relationship with the Saga series, is that they'd already released one of the first Saga game in America under the title The Final Fantasy Legend. And they would do the next two Saga games on Game Boy as well that way, as Final Fantasy Legend 2 and Final Fantasy Legend 3. And in the promotional materials they released, they actually hyped up that connection. And that does make me wonder if there was some sort of initiative to get this battle system off the ground in that sense, to familiarize players with it by making that connection between the Saga games and the Final Fantasy. By doing that, we released this game, Final Fantasy Legend, and now we're going to release Final Fantasy II. And hey, look, it plays, has sort of some of the same mechanics as this game does, but that didn't happen. So for the uninitiated, Final Fantasy II plays things a little bit differently, a lot differently, really. As anybody who's played a traditional RPG knows, advancement in characters is pretty standard across the board. You fight enemies at the conclusion of a battle, you win experience points. And once you get enough experience points, your character gains a level. When your character gains a level, their attributes increase. Their hit points, their strength, their defense, etc., etc. In certain games, they might learn new skills or new spells. Final Fantasy II doesn't do any of that. Final Fantasy II was actually very ambitious in terms of what it was trying to present, which is a more realistic level progression system, wherein the actions you take in battle determine how your characters develop. So a character who uses physical attacks, they'll see their attack power go up. A character who uses a lot of white magic will see their soul stat increase. A character who uses black magic will see their intelligence stat go up. And also, each stat has sort of a reverse of it that will decrease when its opposite is used a lot. So a character who uses a lot of physical attacks will see their intelligence decrease. So you can't have a strong fighter and black mage at the same time. Otherwise, they'll just sort of balance. It's funny. I saw it happen a lot when I was playing the game, where the same character's stat will increase and decrease in the same battle. There's so many times where I saw Maria, said Maria's intelligence increased, then Maria's intelligence decreased. And it's kind of humorous to watch that. Also, as opposed to the character classes in the first Final Fantasy game, where certain classes could use certain types of weapon and armor, anybody can use any type of weapon or any type of armor in the game, but your ability to use that each type of weapon is based on how it's used as well, and it actually does gain levels. So each time a character uses a sword, they gain points, and once it reaches 100 points, then that type of weapon gains a level. And the more weapon levels you have, the more hits you can do per turn, which in turn increases your the attack power it has, basically. So actually, I knowing more about it now, I got the basics of it, but having actually played through the entire game, it's kind of interesting to see just how much freedom you're given. Because most of what I knew from this game came from game trailers, really stupendous 13-part Final Fantasy retrospective, and they really sort of described this as being a bit more locked in. The way they described the characters, I think they said they become a knight, a humble mage, a simple-minded monk, and a morally conflicted dark knight, referring to the four main characters in turn. But you can make them whatever you want them to be. They're pretty, they each have slight statistical differences when you first start the game, but those are really negligible. You can make them into whatever you want them to be. You can give them whatever character, whatever weapon type, whatever magic type you want to give them. And that's something that surprises me, because you really sort of think more in terms of games like 7 and 8 and 12 as games that really started giving you freedom in developing your characters and whatever you wanted them to be, not really not having them be structured into classes. But it really does let you do whatever you want in this game. Magic also works in that same system. Any character can learn any spell that you want them to. All you do is buy the spell book at a spell store, or gain it or earn it in a random battle or in a chest or something, and you can just say, okay, this character learns a spell. But again, like everything else in the game, you can't just have a spell and have it learn like that. It gains levels too. You have to use it in battle, and it works the same way as weapons do. Is that once it has points, when you get to 100 points, the spell gains a level, and depending on what kind of spell it is, that has different effects. Like, for example, a cure spell, when it levels up, it heals more, it restores more HP. Like a fire spell, the higher level it does, the more damage it does. Of course, that also means that you can't have different levels of the same spell, I think, unless you actually buy it twice and keep it at different two different spells. Fire 1 will level up into Fire 2, and once that happens, you can't use Fire 1 again from that same spell book. That's one of the problems, though, is that it's kind of tedious in that regard. With physical attacks, it's pretty easy. It's pretty balanced in the sense that you're going to be using those things all the time, and it will increase as it needs to as the game goes on. With magic spells, but we'll see the difference is generally the smart thing to do is to have each character specialize in a certain weapon and never use anything but that type of weapon. If you stay with one weapon type, then it's going to advance as you need it to, and stay pretty much in line without having to do any kind of real grinding or just wandering around just getting in battles for the sake of doing that. With magic, you really want to learn more than one spell, so you're going to have to constantly cast spells even when you don't really need to. It's like, in order to get, for example, a heal spell, which is what cures status ailments, to do you any good in battle, you have to use it constantly, hundreds of times, before it's ever going to actually do you any good. So that's kind of tedious. That's really tedious, actually. Heal in life especially, I just had to cast them all the time, even when I had no need for them. Same thing, HP works in a similar way. When you get hit by an enemy and lose a large amount, I think about 20% of your health in a single battle, you will gain more HP, and your vitality, your defense, will also increase as well. Although unlike the magic and the weapons, the game doesn't remember that. It doesn't carry over into other battles. Like you can't gradually lose a lot of HP over a course of several battles and have that add to your have it increase your HP based on that. It has to be all you have to lose 20% in a single battle. And also if it also checks basically what your HP is at the end of the battle, and determines it based on that. So if your character loses half their HP by a really strong attack, and then you have your white mage heal them so that they're at full health at the end of the battle, then they don't get anything. So that one's not that hard to deal with. MP, that's a pain in the butt, because it works the same way as HP. You have to lose 20% of your MP in a single battle to get an MP increase. And you very quickly get to a point where you have enough MP that you're not going to be able, it's going to be really difficult to spend that larger percentage in a single battle, but you're still not going to have enough that it's going to be easy to get through an entire dungeon without exhausting your entire magic supply. And so that's really the only stat I found I really had to grind for a lot, where which even that is difficult, not just tedious and having to get into battles for no reason just to get your stats higher, but difficult because it's still hard to use that much MP in a single battle without really forcing it. Because there is no way for your other characters to waste a turn. If you have non-magic using characters, they have to do something, and that is attack. And even though you have ineffective attacks where you can have them all target the same person, and therefore they won't retarget to another enemy, just like in the first game, you get through about 4 turns, if you have 4 enemies, you have to target something. So unless you have them target each other, which is also a really effective way of breaking the system and getting a lot more HP and defense than the game wants you to have, you're going to have, it's difficult to cast that large amount of spells in a single battle before the battle ends. So getting enough MP is very difficult. And there are also ways to cheat the system. Like I just said, your characters can target themselves in this game as opposed to just the enemies, and you can have them beat the crap out of each other, which a lot of times is more effective and more consistent than having the enemies do it for you. Because for a game that relies so much on the enemies doing things to you to actually get your stats to increase, I've never seen a Final Fantasy game aside from this one where the enemies will actually do nothing during a turn. It actually just says, when the turn comes up, it'll just say, nothing. Which is kind of frustrating in the game where you sort of need them to hit you. You want them to hit you, which is also kind of weird. But there are ways to cheat the system, like having your characters hit each other instead of the enemies. And also, which is kind of an ironic glitch or a programming oversight in a game where everything is based on how you use things, as if the game doesn't register your actions when you use them, it registers them when you input the command. Which means that the way the battle system works is that the turn doesn't play out until all 4 of your characters have put in their commands. Until then, you can backtrack and reissue commands if you change your mind. The only person who can't do that is the 4th party member, because as soon as they put in their commands, that's when the battle starts. So you can backtrack and have somebody put in the same command over and over and over and over again, and just having done that, like say if you are trying to level the Berserk spell or something, and you initiate the command, then back up, then do it again, and do that 5 times. Even though you've only cast a spell once, you'll still get credit for doing it 5 times, even though you didn't. So it is kind of broken in that way. And I did it on occasion, but I tried not to abuse that too much. But there were certain times where I just had too many spells. And so because of that system, where it takes so much use to level up spells, it was easier to only specialize in a small number of spells per character, as few as possible. And I can see how that would frustrate people who really like to use all kinds of magic spells. For me, it didn't really bother me that much because I've never really been a huge magic user in RPGs anyway. I use curative spells, and aside from a few other types of stat-type spells that I might really need depending on the game, I don't usually use magic that much. But yeah, because of that, the game really does kind of limit, unless you just want to spend hours upon hours doing nothing but leveling up a spell, but I didn't want to take that long, so I just figured out what spells were the most important and just leveled them up. But I don't know, it wasn't bad. It wasn't unpleasant for the most part. It felt, even though in some ways you are sort of dependent on the enemies actually doing something to level up your stats, it did kind of feel like you had a large amount of control over it.